writers, agents, and publishers, for the first time since the Gutenberg Press, find themselves lost in a maze of mystery as technology alters the shape of the publishing industry. Searching for Answers is a group of writers throwing pop culture, writing, and publishing into a crucible of clarity, passion, and humor. This group is the Right Pack. In this episode, the Right Pack is going to explore how the children's genre has changed over the years. Stay tuned. Hey, welcome back to Right Pack Radio. This is your host, producer, crazy person, David Allen Lucas. Currently working on two projects at once. I will admit it. One is a fiction book and one is a non-fiction book. The non-fiction book is about using the katana correctly and how to fight with it. And then the other book is, well, stay tuned. I don't want to go into it, except for I will tell you the working title is Splintered Eye.
I was glad that it was Splintered Eye. I half expected you to come out with a completely different one.
It's a different one.
Okay,
that one, that was last week. This week we're writing a completely different one.
Yeah. Anyway, and also with me, and we do have a cast of thousands, so please stay with us on this. Also with me today is my lovely co-host.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Kayembe.
She's popping beers while we're listening.
Yeah.
I have driven her to drink. No, go ahead.
It's caffeine-free Sprite, guys.
Sure.
Okay, anyway,
Yeah,
we're not endorsed by Sprite, so I mean, it's speculative fiction juice because I'm a speculative fiction writer. I also write romance in the pen name Kaseka Indita. And I am just back from ReaderCon and my trip. And I did not win a Shirley Jackson Award for my novelette. But they gave me a stone in true Shirley Jackson lottery fashion, so I could throw it at the winner if I so chose.
Yeah, on that.
That's nice. Did you?
No.
What did you stone?
But you know,
like they give stones to the nominees.
The fact that you were nominated is fantastic, though. I mean, just
absolutely
astounding. Also with us, we're going to miss her next week because she will be on her way out of St. Louis to go on her new adventure in life. But she will be joining us, hopefully, as she can, remotely. And that is the one, the only.
Hi, I'm Chanel H.N. I write speculative fiction, I write literary fiction, I write all sorts of nonsense. Good times. When is this airing?
Sometime in August.
Sometime in August, I will, considering that I already have homework for a program that I haven't started yet, I will be up to my nose in critiques and writing short stories, etc.
And loving it.
And what are you doing exactly?
I'm creative writing master of fine arts at the University of New Orleans.
There we go. So we know we're partying down from Mardi Gras down with Chanel.
We're going to have a hard time squeezing into her dorm room.
We'll make it work.
My 200 square foot apartment.
Yes, and also with us is the artist extraordinaire.
I'm Jennifer Stolzer. I'm a children's book author and illustrator. This is my topic. I'm very excited.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the middle of somewhere in August, so if it's before the 17th, you can come see me at Pop Culture Con in St. Louis, where I'll be selling Threadcaster, which is my YA, which is also children's, my YA fantasy novel, and Dog Park, which is a legit children's picture book. So that's firmly in children's. It'll also be my birthday on the 18th, so happy birthday to me.
There you go. Yay. And you're also going to be at PennCon?
I'll be at PennCon. I'll also be up in Quincy, Illinois for the Big Read. If you live up in that area.
When's that?
It's September the 19th, 13th.
Okay.
I don't know. Look it up. But
and September 9th in Columbia.
In Columbia, yes. If you're in Columbia, we'll be there down there on September 9th. George and I will for a panel of professionals. But the
Whoa, and Ryan's going to jump on.
That's the sound of the professionals fainting.
Yes, they're all fainting. But I bring up the Big Read because we'll actually be talking. I'll be teaching children about doing graphic novels. So that's children's related, and also if you have a teenager, specifically high school, who's interested in that, look up the Quincy Library and see when that's happening, and I'll be there.
And then in October, you will be at
Archon. PenCon Archon.
Yeah.
I have a lot of cons coming up.
You do.
I do. I'm pre-weary. How about that?
There you go. And also joining us today, we haven't been able to have him physically in the studio for a while, so because he's a little bit busy.
Oh, just a bit.
Just with a baby, if nothing else.
Yes.
From the parts unknown, to borrow what Kathleen said, the one, the only.
Hi, this is George Soroy. I'm so happy to say this. President Emeritus of the Missouri Writers Guild. I had a wonderful time as president of the Missouri Writers Guild, but I am very glad that responsibility is with someone else, and they're doing a wonderful job with that as well. I am also an author of science fiction for the young adult reader. You can get both Excelsior and Ever Upward Part 2 in the Excelsior Journey, both YA novels. You can get them in paperback, ebook, and very soon in audiobook. Excelsior is already out in audiobook. And you can also get the complete 5-part serial from Parts Unknown in one big volume now. I've since kind of taken all 5 books and condensed them into one larger one. I will, in addition to what Jen said, I will also be at Pop Culture Con. I will be at PenCon. I will be at Archon. I will also be at the Columbia Writers Guild panel on September 9th. And there was one other one that I think, as of right now, that's kind of escaping me. But I know I have, some other ones lined up. Since this is in likely mid-August or so, I'm really glad so many of you came to my book signing on August 4th over at the 6 North Cafe. It was great seeing so many of you. Yes.
we know that will happen, and then also too that you listen to, and we still can't announce it here on the air because everybody who's sitting around the mic does not know what we're going to be talking about. George and I do, and I'm kind of keeping that as a hint. Hopefully you caught the announcement that occurred on August the 6th.
The 6th,
right?
yes.
And we'll tune in on October 2nd.
You guys are having like
October
a joint...
9th.
October 9th.
October 9th.
October 9th, thank you.
You're having a joint presidential kvetch session, right?
Yeah, well, that's going to happen. Something's coming.
That's how we normally hang out.
Yeah, exactly. Stay tuned. And also with us is the Sky Commodore Admiral, whatever, pirate.
Of pirates.
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
Let's turn it into a
Let's do an
lolcat.
R.
Yeah. I don't know what that was, but yes, I am Brad R. Cook, and I do write a bunch of steampunk. I write for kids, middle grade, and YA. I am a member of SCBWI, which is the big young writers organization out there. And there's a bunch of stuff probably coming down the pipe, and I will not bore you with all of it, so go check it out at bradrarcook.com.
Excellent. And also with me is my former competition for that who will get their first draft done. I'm not in that competition anymore, so just saying.
Yeah, well, I think that contest is just on hold. I think we'll start it up again in a few weeks. But I'm Melanie Lucas. I will be getting back to writing soon, as maybe when I get my new glasses. We'll see.
As we know, her health situations are secured or figured out.
Seeing is very important to writing.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. And you've been published in scientific papers?
Yes, under Melanie Polanyi. But those are definite nonfiction papers meant for professionals. At some point in time, maybe I'll write something more for research related, as in the process of research, and that would probably be boring, but at least understandable to the general audience.
Fair enough.
By contrast.
And with us back from the desert of the unknown, known as college. Now she's back full. You're done, right?
No.
Okay.
No.
Oh, we need
I
to
still
talk
have
about it.
this till December.
Well, I was hoping. Anyway, first off, you're going to introduce yourself as a children's author, then the more seductive side, so go for it.
So I write children's books under the name Carrie Lee Williams. I have 2 of them currently out. You can find them on Amazon. And then my more adult stuff is under Lee Savage. I write the erotica for the Truly Wicked. And the newest thing out is we finally did an audiobook for Goldie's Three Bears. So you can find that now.
And who was the voice actor for that? And it wasn't me. I know that.
Our wonderful panel member over across from me, George.
Excellent.
That must have been an adventure.
It's just
Right, that sounds fun.
Which he
It
uses
was.
a different name for, and I'm blanking on the name he uses for that, because it's different than what he normally voices over for.
It was just a last minute decision to go ahead and give it a different name and not like have someone let me look up this guy who wrote Excelsior. What's this? Is this a fairy tale? No.
Well,
But I
Not
must
that
say,
kind of thing.
it's already
Happy
doing really
with it.
well. I mean, it's been out for less than a week, and we're already selling. So,
Oh,
yeah.
Good deal.
Okay, for those who are listening, we only got 2 people left to go. So next is our Madame of Murder herself.
Fedora Amos, I write Victorian whodunits like Jack the Ripper in St. Louis and Mayhem at Buffalo Bill's Wild West, coming in 2019. Have your ticket punched by Frank James. I'm also president of Greater St. Louis Sisters in Crime, and my next appearance will be at the end of September, and I don't remember the exact date, but I've been invited by the St. Louis Public Library to a brunch, which is for favorite mystery writers of St. Louis.
There you go.
Nice.
And coming to us out of the woods in Hannibal, Missouri. Go for it, Ryan.
I'm Ryan P. Freeman, and I write fantasy. I have a couple of works that are already out, and I recently got signed with Metamorphosis Literary Agency. And if my dogs don't bark too loud, I will have my latest work traditionally published, tentatively called Nameless, which is going to start reaching out in the fall to publishers. And I just love writing fantasy. I don't know what else to say. There we go.
Good enough. And he was recently picked up by Metamorphosis Publishing Literary Agency. So there's hopefully future come on that. Okay, to start us off, I have a question for the group about children's literature, children's genre. And everybody who around the table knows what I've said before, so I'm going to say this here. In the late 1980s, early 90s, depending on when the hell I took that class in college, the concept of children's literature would not allow you to write about kids getting hurt, maimed, talk about drugs, stuff like that. There's a whole story there. I took a class and had to beg the teachers to let me write a middle school book instead of a grade school book, because I don't think in grade school like writing, at least back then. Definitely not in the Leave It to Beaver style. So, how has the genre changed? Have we gotten past Leave It to Beaver? Is Leave It to Beaver still out there? Take it away, those who write children. Go.
Yes, it has. There are more dark stories now that express topics to help children get through issues like death, drug abuse, disabilities too. There's a whole genre on discovering about living with your disability or how to handle other people with disabilities, just to try to get kids aware of topics and issues now.
Okay, I've got Ryan, then Kathleen. Oh, Kathleen, are you dovetailed?
Yeah.
Okay, dovetail first, and then Ryan, then Jen.
I would like a timeline for some of these changes, because I know when I was in elementary school, I read cancer romances.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Lurleen McDaniel was...
Yes! Oh my goodness.
So, I mean, and then there was Bridget Terabithia when I was a kid.
Oh,
and
good. That book.
So, I mean, there have been some darker things, but, as a whole genre, I'm not sure when that started.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we even have a timeline, to be honest with you, with that. And
There's always been two sides to, not always been,
Yeah.
but for at least 40 years or more, there have been two sides to the children's book market.
Okay.
There's your Berenstain Bear type, happy, joy, nothing bad is ever going to happen. And then there is your darker stuff, a la anything like Stranger Things or half a dozen other things that are published out there. I would say R.L. Stine, but he's more of the funny side of horror. But there is some dark stuff out there for kids.
I don't know. R.L. Stine, under a different name, I believe, got pretty dark.
That's why
Pretty
I went under a
excellent.
different
That's
name.
probably right roll underneath another name. Are you dovetailed, Lee, or okay? So I got Ryan, Jen, Lee. Ryan.
Okay, well, there's a couple of things I've noticed. To start off, big fan of Skyrim, and I still play it to death. And one of the things they have in the game is that you can't kill kids. They're non-killable characters, and they've set that up intentionally. Not that I know anyways, but who knows who's playing Skyrim. So that's there. That's I feel like storytelling is also included in video games. So just the other day, I was down at a local coffee shop in Hannibal, and they had a bunch of books, and one of them, done up in classic, illustrated kids style book, and it was My Tattoo Story, and it was about a family and a kid, and the little kid was asking his dad about his different tattoos, and it was just really interesting to see because you usually don't see that. And so I definitely think that's kind of like a bleeding edge way that the industry is changing. The other thing I wanted to bring up that we mentioned just now is on the darker, heavier side of stuff for kids. There's an awesome book and also a movie that came out called A Monster Cult with Patrick Ness. It's incredible, and it deals with a kid whose mom has cancer, but it's like a modern fairy tale sort of style. But it's amazing, and I feel like even for me as a cancer survivor years later, it's meaningful. I know it's made for kids to help them grapple with that issue, but it's almost like transcends the different genre type between, kids literature, YA, adult. It's just a good story.
Jen, and then Lee.
Let's broaden this out from individual examples of specific authors and specific titles and what they do. Children's genre, the children's literature genre is very, very broad because YA is considered part of children's.
Mm-hmm.
It incorporates readers from birth to voting age. So how has it changed? Well, what point along the audience timeline are you talking about? How has it changed? There's still plenty of books out there that are sweet and Berenstain Bears-esque because they're aimed at preschoolers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that most people don't want to frighten a preschooler too badly. The other aspect of children's that influences the changes is also that children's media is some of the more heavily regulated media in the world.
True.
Specifically by the American government, since we are in America. There's such a thing that's in action right now called, Common Core. Common Core determines what is taught in an elementary school, in a public school, and how it's taught, and at what grade level things are appropriately taught. And those kinds of regulations feed into the traditional publishing sphere of children's. A blanket rule is if you're an independent author and you're publishing your own book, you can publish anything you want. If you want to scare a preschooler out of their mind, you go ahead and do it because there's no big brother looking down on you telling you can't do that. But it's whether or not you want to sell books and how you're going to sell them and how you're sort of limiting your audience because you are writing for children, but you are selling to their parents. It's very complicated, and just the blanket, how children's has changed, we're looking at how the world has changed, and how that relates to providing media to children and teaching children, because everything, even if you're not writing a color book or a letter book or a science book to teach kids specifically, kids are the type of animal that just soaks in information, even wrong information, and tries to put it into their sense of self and into their sense of the world, because they're still building that. So that's the responsibility that children's authors, all the way up to voting age, have to their audience, and that makes it different than writing for adults who have already set their sense of self and already have their ideas.
Cool. We've got two dovetails. It's Melanie and myself. Then we've got Lee, and then we've got Ryan. Go for it.
Well, you were just saying that if you wanted to scare preschoolers, I remember this was probably on PBS, and it was a sort of a documentary about the making of Arthur.
Okay.
And Arthur is a kid's cartoon show.
Uh-huh.
And what the person writing, the script writer, whoever it was being interviewed, his point was they were terrible at figuring out what actually scared little kids.
Uh-huh.
Because there was an episode they had some concerns about. But they went off and it went in and there were no complaints. The following episode, they had an episode where there was sort of a dream sequence, whatever, and one of the characters got so upset that in the dream sequence their head exploded. They got over 10 complaints about that scaring the little kids.
Uh-huh.
No, but none of the adults in the room flagged that as a concern. So what scares kids is very different than what adults think will scare kids.
And that is a testament to testing your product on actual children before you declare it at a
Which is
certain age
easier
level.
to do with a book that you're publishing than an ongoing series, I'll just say.
Just real quick, and then over to Lee. And that is, as you were talking, Jen, I just remembered that we had talked about a client of yours a while back who was working on a book that was intended to be taught in school. And if there's any listeners out there who have similar aspirations, I doubt the education system has changed that much since I got my bachelor's degree. If you want to do your research, look at what the states of Texas and California are teaching. They control the rest of the country because they are the biggest school districts. They've got big school districts that buy lots of textbooks. The industry listens to them. Go ahead, you got dovetail back to me.
Yeah, just since you brought up publishing for education, like for the education system, if you are an independent publisher, stop that. Become a traditionally published publisher because independent authors don't find their way into public school systems. They might find their way into a private school, maybe. More than likely, if you want to teach kids, you are either teaching them yourself at a library read or putting together a writers guild's workshop, or appealing to homeschoolers, when parents are just buying the books, but then you're back to selling directly to parents. So if you want to get your book in a school system, you need to get published by, Scholastic, and then they'll get it in for you. That's not something that you're going to be able to accomplish at this point in history.
Right. Over to Lee, then over to Ryan.
Okay, so I wanted to mention too, part of it is like what Jen was saying too, is the change in our audience. So like even my daughter who likes to write, her stuff is very dark. She was telling me one of her stories that she was turning into school, and I'm like, they're gonna allow that? Because it was so dark.
How old is your daughter?
She just turned 15. So, but she did this last year, and it was like, it was darker than some of the horror stuff that I've seen out there, and it's like, I'm like, wow. So you have to think, but she grew up with more dark, supernatural type stuff seeing on TV. So the whole environment has changed from kids of our generation or generations before us where they couldn't see as much TV like that or read those type of things. So the audience has changed in itself.
Brad, you're dovetailing, and then over to Ryan.
Yeah, so having done kids writing contests for almost a decade now, I can tell you the kids are the darkest writers I have ever met. And I mean this. It's a joke, and yes, please laugh. But it is true. They don't have the inhibitions that adults have. They don't have that thing telling them they shouldn't be writing that. You shouldn't be scaring somebody like that. You've pushed it too far. They don't really have those kinds of things. So I have noticed a trend that, especially when we were like the Big Read or the Big Write and the other one that I was part of, Young Writers Awards, are in the fall. So they happen right before Halloween. So that, I will admit, also helps to aid into the why they're all scary horror stories. But it is something I find interesting because it's something I find a lot of children's authors do, where they dumb down themselves for the children, thinking that children are too simplistic or too whatever to be able to understand these kinds of concepts, to be able to get this kind of stuff. And to be honest, kids turn into little adults way sooner than most parents think. And because parents drive the markets, this is the way that most entertainment goes. But the reality is that kids are way smarter and have things figured out much, much earlier than most people give them credit for.
Jen?
Well, kids think differently than adults do. And becoming small adults, yes, this is true. They're learning about their world and they're forming their world, but they lack that sort of adult perspective. Kids are real self-centered because they have to focus on themselves because they don't know who they are yet. So, the Arthur story where the kid's head exploded, they said, holy crap, what makes my head explode? I'm scared of my head exploding. Versus a story about aliens coming to Earth and blowing everything up. That doesn't have that same sort of immediate threat to yourself impact. So kids will write about, and then the vampire killed 500 people. And we go, oh my gosh, 500 people! But none of those people were them, so it's not as scary as if the vampire came in and killed my dog. It's like, that's scary. So I'm trying to emphasize this whole audience thing. Like, the kids, we can't guess what kids like, we just have to try.
Okay, I'm going to dovetail first and then over to Brad because I'm going to lose it otherwise. Just an FYI to our audience, as you know about St. Louis Writers Guild, because a lot of members and officers are on this podcast, that we're not acting as St. Louis Writers Guild, as FYI. Through ourselves and then through Gateway Con, we do have two, actually really technically four, children's writing contests for kids out there, so if you would pass that on, at www.stlwritersguild.org under contest. Go ahead, Brett.
Okay, kids movie. It's been out for decades. It's a huge franchise. It is literally about giant reptiles terrorizing and eating people. And it is a beloved series, Jurassic Park. Everyone loves this. Kids rush out to the movie theater to watch it. They buy dinosaur toys and on their own time. You gotta love it. Yet never are they thinking, "Oh, a dinosaur's gonna eat me." Mm-hmm. It's a thing you can get away with. Like, you can have dinosaurs eating people, but a person eating people, that would probably be really bad.
I was a teeny tiny child when the first movie came out, and I petitioned my parents so hard to let me see it because I was under 13 and I wasn't allowed to see it. And when I finally did see it, the thing that scared me the most was when the T-Rex ate the goat.
First goat.
Good enough. Are you dovetailing or you got one? Okay. Ryan and then Fedora.
Okay, well, something that Jen was talking about a little ways back was a bit about the demographic. My marketing side, because I also do freelance marketing for authors. One of the things that I've noticed following Nielsen, who does national trends for TV, radio, you name it, they do it all. They're saying that Generation Y, most of the audience we're talking about here, they're the most plugged in generation ever. And I think kind of goes without saying when you say plugged in, they devour stuff that I would consider more mature people, and they love it. And it's so interesting to watch because I feel like there's definitely a generational shift in the sort of content they devour and the sort of like complexity that they're able to deal with. I don't know how many times through my work with nonprofits and whatnot in Missouri, the kids come up and they'll talk to me and they'll be bringing up stories that, real life stories that I don't think I could fathom at their age. It's such, I don't think we could say it enough to not underestimate them, to not write down to them, to say stories that matter because they're wrapped up in one themselves, and the more that we can write good story, the more we can navigate it.
And that's going to bring up a question. I'm going to go to Fedora, Brad, and then I'm going to throw out a different question for people. Fedora.
I'm not sure it's so much that children have changed over the course of time as that publishers especially have been completely clueless as to what's going on. Take, for example, the person that we are celebrating today, Madeline Lango.
Oh, yes.
Forgot about her. Yes.
Because
Sorry, thank you.
she is now dead, and she wrote her famous book. I don't know exactly when, I'm sure somebody does, but it's been many years ago. It was rejected many, many times, even though she was already a well-recognized author.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally it came into the public, and nobody thought it was going to sell or live forever, but look at it now. And why? Because it's so mysterious in so many ways, I think, with its giant brain that is so controlling and
They thought the
looking
kids
for
would
dad.
better understand it.
What?
They thought it was too complex for kids to understand. It was too complex for adults to understand.
Yeah,
That's
kids
not
got
it.
it.
For those who
Kids
don't know which
understand.
book you're talking about is...
A
A
Wrinkle in
Wrinkle in
Time.
Thank you.
Time.
It's one of my favorite
Which
books.
just very recently was turned into a movie, though I know that most people in this room hate that movie.
Well, you say most people. Mostly I just said last week that I hated that movie.
Absolutely.
I didn't see it.
I'm into though. I will.
Okay. Excellent. Brad? And then I'm going to throw a question out there.
Yeah, so kind of to circle back around, going to throw out, for those of you who don't know, we're talking about when did all of this change. Well, for any of us who are of a certain age, we all know exactly when it changed, and it was Indiana Jones. So Indiana Jones was a PG movie that came out. It was hailed as a kid's movie. I myself went to the theater to see it at a very, very young age that I'm not going to give out. But I was very young, and to my credit, it was aimed at my generation as well. I screamed my way through it because I don't know if you've seen Indiana Jones in the first one. So
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah.
Not Last Crusade. I was just watching that one. That's why I said it. And that's a much better movie. No. Point being that there are some really scary things that come out of there. There's like guys impaled on arrows and spikes, and there's all kinds. Yes, giant tarantulas and
The whole first sequence alone.
Yes,
is just like
exactly.
This is basically are you in or you out? It's like, this is what we got going.
Needless to say, I was not the only kid who screamed his head off. And this is where we get now PG-13.
Yeah.
Which became a thing because of this movie and because of other movies and everything that's going on. So, and actually, I don't think it was that one. It was the second one.
It was a two-parter.
Yeah.
It was Gremlins and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. It was 1984.
And E.T.
Yeah.
Both of them coming out at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was all like Spielberg wanting to, because
Spielberg has a problem with scaring
Gremlins
kids.
is PG.
Yes.
Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, PG.
Yes.
A heart is being ripped out of someone's chest,
That movie scared me to death.
and is
Yes.
still beating, and catches on fire. PG.
The Sith in me is always winning through that.
And so that is when Steven Spielberg's petitioned to Jack Valenti and said, can there be a middle ground? Thus,
And
the
let's also
PG-13
throw out there that this is also coming
came
on
out.
the heels of all of the parental controls.
Yeah.
They're coming in music. You got that nice sticker that used to exist on album covers that I don't
Parental
even know
advisory.
if album covers
Yep.
exist anymore. So. But yes, parental advisory stickers. Those were invented at that same time. You had all of these, big hearings up in Congress about all this craziness. So that's really when all of these changes came in, and they were done for reasons and all of that. But it has affected the way that we aim stuff at children. The second thing I'm going to throw out, and this kind of comes back around to the advancements we're talking about here and how kids have advanced. So I do a lot of school visits, going into middle schools and high schools mostly. And I have to say this. In every high school I have ever been in, I have had a conversation about Game of Thrones. Which, to be honest, I don't know if I would let my high schooler watch if I had a high schooler. But, if we were sitting down and certain depend on maturity and stuff, but it's not aimed at them. Now, here's the real fun. I would say at every middle school, and this is true, at every middle school I've ever gone into, at least one or two kids will bring up Game of Thrones. Now, I do know that this is more about shocking their classmates than them actually having watched any of the episodes. My guess is they probably watch YouTube clips or something like that. But the point is that, even someone as young as a middle schooler is absorbing that content because it's out there on the internet, and they can. And for anyone who's a parent out there, they know that their child is more internet savvy than they can ever hope to be. And because of that, there will always be a curve that benefits the young. And I think that that's honestly a good thing, that most older people are clueless, because it keeps them out of young people's culture. But you know, it is something to consider when you're writing these books, that you don't have to, like, I never aim down. I treat my readers as though they are adults when I write to them. But the way that I write, the words that I use, the way that I craft a story, that is all very much dependent upon the age group of which I am, aiming. But I don't pull back just because I'm writing for kids. There's no need. I didn't hold anything back when I was writing the Iron Chronicles, and that's for YA. But if you go and you check out the Airdranium Adventures, there's just as much action. There's just as much adventure. The only trick was finding a way to not have a kid use a sword and solve all his problems, and in doing so, you make a really good kids book. So, just my advice.
George, and then I'm going to throw this out.
I'm kind of bracing myself for the technology that Scarlett's going to have access to in the years to come. So.
It's a good way to actually brace yourself.
Yeah, that's his daughter, his baby daughter.
Yeah,
Daddy, have you seen the newest Hollow book?
Exactly. But there's also somebody else that we need to give credit for children's writing and everything, which is exactly what Brad was talking about before. And it was the insistence on not dumbing down to the writing to their readers, and that goes right to Stan Lee, as a comic book writer. He was somebody who was basically, he was peddling in an industry that he himself was ashamed to be in for so many years. And it was only when he was given the free rein to actually go ahead and create the characters and create the situations and everything that he wanted to create. He was writing for himself. And he was basically, by doing that, he was maturing the entire industry to the point where everyone was basically playing catch-up to what he was doing. So you have, all these different characters that are speaking to all these different social situations. You have a character in Peter Parker who was like the quintessential young adult character who was dealing with problems and everything while dealing with all these sudden responsibilities and the great power that he had because of it. So you have, that's something that you also need to give credit to when it comes to the development of writing and how it's all changed, because his way of thinking was he can go ahead and just put out some very random larger word that a child is not used to reading, and they'll go and look it up. That's what he had in mind, and that wound up being a big boost to the whole industry and writing in general.
Brad, and then Fedora, then myself.
Yeah, so real quick, you got to give credit to Stan for basically creating what every kids show going forward will call the very special episode.
Oh yeah,
because they would have comic books dedicated to hard-hitting issues, usually just one or two, so they could slip them through the censors, and children's television would follow suit with the very special episode, which would then tackle drugs or abuse or
parents talk to your kids about that.
So yeah, exactly. So definitely a whole thing there.
Fedora?
Well, I think we might all wish in that case that he turned some of his magic onto real science and real issues and real things that are possible to happen, because certainly he could be confusing children in a very serious way when we imagine that Ant-Man, for example, can be a teeny tiny thing, or an 80-foot giant in the next section, and then 10 seconds later in a movie or in a magazine, in a comic book.
Oh,
I think maybe we need a good dose of reality in here somewhere.
Go ahead.
Kids know the difference between fantasy and reality.
Do they?
Pretty quick.
I'm not so sure.
If they're watching a Marvel movie, they figured it out by then. And the other thing is not everybody is made to build the technology of the future. Some people are made to inspire it. Like Gene Roddenberry with the communicators. Thank you. Now I have a cell phone. It is smarter than I am. But we wouldn't necessarily have that had there not been people writing things in fantasy that then those children, when they grew up, would turn into reality.
The Star Trek
And you
pad.
think we're going to have the ability to minimalize somebody and then make him into a giant?
Well, maybe.
The only place Ant-Man really gets it wrong is by saying that it's the same the mass, and stuff, and doing that whole thing. Because if you
Look up
simply
game
shrink
theory.
the space between molecules, or expand the space between molecules, you could get away with it in scientific terms.
Wouldn't
the
you
problem
rupture
becomes
something very serious?
because you're simply taking all the particles in your body and shrinking them down. The problem becomes when Ant-Man punches somebody in the face and they fall down. Because that necessarily would not happen. And if it did happen, then he's got a tank keychain that weighs, like 6 tons.
I have
Anyway.
serious reservations about all this.
Well, and I was going to come over here to Jen, who's dovetailing. But I was going to say, just a reminder: any comic books, generally speaking, is really more mythology than anything else. It is a form of a mythos that is told. Moving on to Jen, then Brad. I'm still waiting, and I think I've got Ryan waiting.
Yeah, just saying that, content is important to be considered, but also the goal of the work. The goal of the comic book is to be fantastical. Then we got Bill Nye to teach us about science. There's room in the world for both camps.
Well, I don't think Marvel books are, doing much for Bill Nye.
Well, then you go to Bill Nye to get Bill Nye.
He's not out there the way Marvel is,
Right.
is what I'm saying.
Yeah, so essentially, if you're looking at Marvel, you're looking at the past, because all the stories Marvel's telling are from the last 60, 70 years or so.
And they're on
Point
the screens
being
today.
Because we're pulling this content finally. It's been relegated to comic books for 70 years, and it's finally expanding out into books and TV and movies and all of this other kind of stuff. But we have realized that representation in fiction and representation, the way in which people are portrayed, is important. This is something new. This is not something that has been going on for 40, 50 years. Representation before now has been the white guy is going to save the day.
Mm-hmm.
Or,
And
something...
get the girl.
Yes. And get the girl.
It's a
and
prize.
all of these other things that are going to come down. We have tons of tropes. But the switch is, now we have things that are specifically being written for STEM. So things that are being written for the sheer purpose of inspiring kids to go into the sciences. So it's a short story about science. It's a collection of short stories about science.
Mm-hmm.
It's the way the character is portrayed. My character in the Gear Blade is a chemist, and goes out from that, and a biologist. So she's almost more scientific than she is a warrior, and I do that very much on purpose because I'm writing towards the trend of STEM and all of that. But more importantly, I want to show well-rounded characters who are intelligent and know how to do things and are more like how we are today, in the sense of people are not necessarily more educated than they've ever been or anything like that, but the notion that we can promote the future by, affect the future by getting to the people who need it the most, i.e. the youngest people.
What is STEM?
So it is science, technology, engineering, and math.
Right.
So for those of you who don't know, but goes to course guidelines in schools. It goes to the way in which things are written and how everything's kind of laid out. So it's an important new trend that is coming around. This notion of writing almost for social awareness and to promote the better futures than just entertainment.
It's a good topic because that brings us back to the title of our show, which is How Have Things Changed?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and this is just me being an armchair, sociologist, I think that marks the difference between back in the 80s and 90s when we were trying to protect kids from everything that was dangerous to the present day where the public mindset has shifted to we should make a more well-rounded media sphere for children. Make sure that we get people who are writing from different perspectives to write from their perspectives. provide stories about refugees and stories about religious differences to children who are learning about those things, because we are seeing, as adults now, we were the ones that were protected from all that when we were younger. And so when it's evolved that we realized that we grew up knowing so little about the world we were in. So now we're providing content, we being, the current generation of creators. That includes people who are older than me and people who are younger than me. The current generation of creators that have grown up on media created for kids when we were kids are trying to compensate for what we felt was a deficiency in our own childhood. And that's just my kind of like soapbox screed to throw out there to the room.
I've got Brad and George dovetailing. I still got Ryan and I in the queue.
So, you're totally right with the 80s thing, and there's multiple sides of the 80s that I love. First is the notion that kids' television had to have that moral mark to it. So you had G.I. Joe at the end of every episode doing, telling kids some moral lesson, or, to be honest, those are the funniest things in the world, and I almost wish they were back. Because how much fun would it be for Steven Universe to, or something like that?
Well, he puts that in the content of his show.
Yeah, I know. It's now in the content of the show. It's not a little thing that gets tacked on to the end. And the other thing I was going to say is the 80s also gave us the last bastion of the group of young kids who can go out into the world and solve problems. They're on their bikes. They can ride anywhere. It doesn't matter if it's to the old mill or if it's some crazy place over here. Or, they're just...
Find One-Eyed Willie's treasure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, so there are so many of these. But nowadays, that's not really a story you can tell, which is why Stranger Things and, all of these other stories are kind of being set in that time. And it's almost kind of sad. I almost hope we can break out of that and get kids back to just being able to roam free and go on crazy adventures. Though... I understand we live in a different world where there's some creepy guys out there, so don't let your kids do that.
See, I don't think there's any difference in the number of creepy kids. We just didn't acknowledge the creepy people existing in the 80s.
I don't know. We can debate numbers on that.
That'll be
That's a different topic.
We can debate numbers on that later, but I understand the change, and I'm not meaning that we need a change in society, but it is kind of interesting. And one of the things I love too is I was just watching It.
It's great.
And to be honest, It is one of the best kids-like movies. Now, it's not for kids. Do not let your children watch It. But if you take out all the scary clown stuff, that movie is just a great movie about kids. It's, they're all dealing with something. They're all coming together to help each other. There's this whole back and forth. I mean, Stephen King really went after that genre bad and then twisted it and turned it into a crazy horror movie for adults. So... it's an interesting thing, though. Something I just noticed. I was watching It the other night.
I assume they took out the sex.
He did
scene.
this.
Yes, they did.
Yes,
Yeah.
They've modified it in all the movies.
Ever since they wrote that book and everyone read that book, they all said, "We love this story. We got to do something about the ending."
Yeah.
Because everyone else other than Stephen King
Stand By
realized that
Me
was a
is very
problem.
much the same.
Yeah.
The boys are on an adventure together, going out into the world and coming together to solve their problems, and they have the bullying and all that they have to deal with from the older kids. So.
George, Ryan, go George first.
To play on what Jen was talking about, how a lot of the young children's literature and everything can introduce children to all these different social topics. One of the probably like the biggest success from that from the children's literature and everything happened in like the late 90s when somebody took a chance on this this single mom writing this story about a wizard school, and all of a sudden young adult has become this huge phenomenon that it is now, because now all of a sudden everyone is thinking, get me one of those. So you have one franchise after another coming out, and then because Hollywood is always the last ones to come to the party, they're trying to come out with theirs. And stumbling along the way, you see, as it's going, not every single one is going to be that big hit that they are in literature. But it's pretty fascinating to see how how it's all kind of exploded really since Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone came out.
I'm asking. Jen has a great dovetail, I know, because she's asking.
I just wanted to point out that J.K. Rowling is definitely a place on that timeline we asked for.
Thank you. That's actually the question I've been holding back here since before the Marvel blow up. And I don't know if we're going to get enough time because I do want to talk about. I want to ask the question. I'm sorry, Ryan. I'm actually going to preempt you. My apologies.
Sorry, Ryan.
Okay.
And since George has opened up the door for me, and I've been waiting for this, my understanding of a kid. Let me explain. I stopped reading kids lit for the most part when I was in 5th grade. By that time, unless it was forced on me by the teachers, I stopped writing for kids when I was in 4th or 5th, 6th grade, somewhere in there. I always wrote towards adults. That was my audience. So my understanding, though, from what I've been told, is that J.K. Rowling revolutionized and blew breath of life back into the children's literature field, children's literature industry. I don't know if that's truth or not, but if that is true, how, why, and where's it going now? Jen?
She did. She exploded the speculative side of children's. Because obviously we were still writing for kids all that time. But a fantasy story specifically aimed at children, that was the first really big one that took off. Probably since Madeline L'Engle, honestly. And I don't know if that has anything to do with how people feel, how people felt. It might have just been the trend, because we're the big publishing houses are always chasing the numbers. What's selling, what are people buying for people. Most fantasy fans, when they were little, would immediately go pick up C.S. Lewis. People aren't writing new fantasy, and then J.K. Rowling arrived. It's the exact same way that I wanted to bring up, since we're doing timeline revolutionaries, Dr. Seuss.
Mm-hmm.
Before Dr. Seuss came along, everyone was reading Dick, Jane, and Spot, and that was boring. It had no imagination to it, and so he wanted to create a new easy reader for children, and he found so much resistance to that because it was change and because it was different. And so it takes... There are people that we can find as benchmarks that move it forward.
Judy
Bloom.
Would you put Judy Bloom in there?
I would.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Hardy Boys, Judy Bloom, all those.
Nancy Drew.
Nancy Drew.
Okay.
We're going way back in time.
Brad, and then Ryan. I feel like Ryan, I don't know if you'd give me a dovetail or a...
Okay,
Oh
so
my
we did
God.
just announce basically all of the major kids franchises that existed before J.K. Rowling.
You didn't mention the Boxcar Children. Or
okay,
the Babysitter's Club.
The Babysitters Club definitely.
Sweet
Valley High.
Yes.
It's like
Oh, I
Andy Brown.
actually just want to throw one out too as well that I think was a very big hit during our time growing up, which is the Choose Your Own Adventure books.
Oh, God.
So
yes.
huge.
I
Yeah.
love the Choose.
Point being, so J.K. didn't invent the genre.
Mhm.
What she did do was figure out a way to make it so that these weren't just kids' books anymore, they were like teenager books. And in doing so, in the way that they were marketed that way, in essence, inventing YA.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to credit J.K. with anything, you have to credit her with the, not invention of YA,
Define.
but the definition and then the explosion of YA. Because nobody had midnight releases. Nobody had that before J.K. And to be honest, I don't know how many people will have it going forward. But that's what it did. And then having it be aimed at that age so that the people reading it were the people who were the kids in the books. It spoke to a generation. And that generation grew up on Harry Potter.
Uh-huh.
And that generation, graduated with Harry Potter. And that generation moved into,
Twilight.
adulthood,
Twilight.
basically. But then the movies allowed them to go back
Mhm.
and relive it all again. So it's been kind of this cycle. And in doing so, now obviously most of her fans are adults, and now we get the adult side of Harry Potter, which is kind of intriguing too. So it's been a fascinating way to watch this evolve and grow. I'm sure we will see it emulated more. But that's kind of what you can credit J.K. with.
Okay, and I will, while I did say I quit reading Kids Lit, I had picked it up since then. I have read almost all of Harry Potter, just not the last book. Ryan, I just don't want it to end, so I don't read the last book.
It's kind of my forte with fantasy, but I feel like the oldest form of children's literature I can think of is fairy tale. And I feel like it's kind of evolved from there. into like kind of the multifaceted tree that it is now of different genres. But the oldest form I felt was always fairy tale. I've been on a Victorian fantasy kick lately. And you see that because even their characters are harkening back to olden times, for them. And it's always those old myths, it's always those old legends, it's always those old kind of fantastic tales. It's something that makes a kid go, really, that you tell them around a fireside or during a dull day, just kind of keep them to calm down or go to bed or whatever. And we're still kind of working that out in our own modern culture, which I think is fascinating.
Kathleen, I think you were trying to share something, and
Oh, no. This is for afterwards when I tell you why you need to read books.
Oh, never mind. Okay, and moving right over to Jen.
If we're gonna dive backwards in time,
Back to the future. Go ahead.
fairy tale was fed out of Greek myths, out of Bible stories, and those were fed out of cave paintings and fireside tales. And all of those come from the fact that not just children, but humans learn through storytelling. It's all about learning. We are a flocking species. We group together and we learn from each other's experiences, and that's what storytelling is. So, fairy tales, they were written to tell you that wolves are dangerous and don't get off the path. And they've stayed with us because those things are still true. And that's the Greek gods and those stories, those were told to children just like they were told to adults. And it all comes back to the fact that stories about people are how we learn our lessons.
And
I was going to say, fairy tales were not always, marketed, I suppose, to children.
Yes.
They were stories for adults. I have a book of raunchy fairy tales that are definitely not for children, but they're out at the same time as all these other things. Yeah, like
Grimm
the
is pretty
Grimms
grim.
watered down their fairy tales because people were like, oh, for kids. So, but yeah, I think you're entirely right. We learn through other people's experiences, and one of the benefits of fiction writing in its many forms is we get to learn from the experiences of people who are having adventures we probably will never have, but we get the emotional lesson out of it and a model of how to deal with things that are similar in our own lives based on what happened to the characters and how they dealt with it.
Which is why it's so important with the modern trends of writing for children that we get people from lots of different perspectives writing about their own specific experiences, maybe not true stories, but stories that come from their perspective to help teach children and adults and everyone reading the books about the experience of someone that they cannot have. I will never know what it's like to, let's think of something I'll never know what it's like. I'll never know what it's like to have grown up as a child in Scandinavia. That's something that I have missed the boat on. But I can read a story about that and learn a little bit of what that was like and become wiser because of it.
and bring us out with our final word.
We've mentioned that, you can learn how to deal with things through reading fiction about people who have dealt with things like that. But one of the other things that we learn from fiction is empathy with people who are not like ourselves. And that's one of the reasons the push for, own voices and more diversity in what is being published is so important, because it's teaching us to empathize with people who have different experiences from our own. And that's really where we as a culture need to go in order to, do well in this world and leave something for the next generations.
That was the pre-final word. Final word.
It's a support word. The support word being that authenticity is so important in those things. Because as a little kid, I grew up learning what corporate America thought that I wanted, that living in an inner city, as an inner city black kid was like. And that has changed a lot of, that has set a lot of people onto a mindset of this is exactly what that experience is. So authentic stories from authentic places that tell real, actual things in a human way, not a trope way, not a manufactured way. that's how we learn, because we're learning by putting ourselves in the shoes of these people. And if we put ourselves into prefab shoes, then we only learn exactly what we already knew.
And on that note, tune in next week for yet another interesting topic in the writing industry. Thank you for listening. Please share this and also subscribe on whatever platform you listen to and leave comments. We love them. Thank you. Take care. The new theme songs for Right Pack Radio were written and performed by Meredith Tate. All copyrights remain with her.